Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are looking at a paper today that, well, it sounds like it belongs on Sesame Street,
Yeah.
but it is actually addressing one of the most crippling bottlenecks in generative AI right now. We are talking about BIGBIRD.
BIGBIRD, yeah. The full title is BIGBIRD, Transformers for Longer Sequences. And yes, the Google research team definitely had some fun with the naming convention there.
Keeping the tradition alive.
Right, following Bert and Elmo. But the problem they are solving is anything but child's play. They are trying to fix the quadratic dependency problem.
Which is the highly technical way of saying that standard large language models have a very expensive and, frankly, very limited attention span. I mean, I think most people listening probably know that early transformers like BERT were capped at 512 tokens.
Barely a blog post.
Exactly. It's nothing. If you wanted to feed it a novel or a complex legal contract or a whole genome sequence, you just hit a wall.
You do. And that wall exists because of the math inside the attention mechanism itself. In a standard dense transformer, you have what's called full self-attention.
Okay, break that down for us.
So full self-attention means every single token in the sequence looks at every other token to calculate the context.
So if I have a sentence, the first word shakes hands with the second word, the third, the
Or
fourth.
fifth, and so on. Right. And that sounds incredibly thorough, but here's the trap. If you double the length of your input sequence, you don't just double the computational work, you quadruple it.
Wow.
It is n-squared complexity.
The dreaded quadratic curve, it just scales horribly as you add more text.
It creates a hardware ceiling. You run out of GPU memory almost instantly. So the whole mission of the BIGBIRD research was to figure out how to process sequences that are 8 times longer.
Up to 4096 tokens. Or...
Exactly. Up to 4096 tokens without needing, a massive supercomputer. They wanted to turn that punishing quadratic cost into a linear one.
So instead of the cost exploding as the text gets longer, it just grows steadily.
Yes.
But to do that, they had to ditch full attention. They had to move to sparse attention.
Correct. They essentially stopped letting every token look at every other token.
This is where the paper uses graph theory, which I actually found to be a really useful way to visualize it. If you picture a transformer's attention as a graph, full attention is a complete graph.
Every node is connected to every other node.
Right. It's this dense, messy web of lines.
Which is great for performance, sure, but terrible for efficiency. So BIGBIRD proposes a sparse graph. You basically delete most of those lines.
But the challenge, and I think this is really the crux of the whole paper, is figuring out which lines you can safely cut. Because if you cut the wrong connections, the model just gets stupid.
It loses all context.
Right. If you cut the connection between the subject of a sentence and the verb just because they are 50 words apart, the model fails.
It completely fails to understand the sentence. So to prevent that, BIGBIRD introduces 3 specific pillars of attention. This keeps the model smart while making it computationally lean.
They needed to cover all their bases.
Exactly. Local context, global context, and then random connections.
Okay, let's look at the first one. Window attention. This one feels like the most intuitive fix to me.
It is. It relies on a concept called the locality of reference. In almost all human languages, and honestly, even in computer code, the most useful information for any given token is usually its immediate neighbors.
Sure. Like in the phrase artificial intelligence, the word artificial directly predicts intelligence. They are sitting right next to each other.
Right. So BIGBIRD creates a sliding window. Each token only attends to, say, W tokens to the left and W tokens to the right.
It's like putting blinders on the model.
Exactly like that. You focus only on your immediate surroundings.
Which solves the local syntax perfectly. But if you were listening and you think about reading a mystery novel, the clue might be in chapter 1, and the solution isn't revealed until chapter 10.
A sliding window is never going to catch that.
Never. It's too myopic. It just doesn't see far enough.
And that is the fundamental limitation of window attention. You lose long-range dependencies. So to fix that, the researchers introduced the second pillar, which is global attention.
The VIP tokens.
Essentially, yes. They designate certain tokens as global, and these tokens get to break the rules of sparsity. They attend to every single token in the sequence, and every single token attends back to them.
The paper outlines 2 ways they actually implement this, right?
Yeah, 2 main ways. You can use internal transformer construction, or ITC, where you just pick some existing tokens in the text to act as the global ones.
Okay.
Or you can use extended transformer construction, ETC, where you add special extra tokens to do the job, like the CLS token you see in BERT.
So if you think of the global tokens as information hubs,
Hmm.
or honestly, like a moderator in a giant debate,
That's a great analogy.
even if two participants are sitting at completely opposite ends of the room and they can't hear each other at all, they both speak to the moderator, so the information still gets transferred across the room.
Exactly. That allows crucial context to flow across the entire 4296 token sequence.
Okay, so we have the neighbors talking to neighbors with the window attention. We have everyone talking to the moderator with global attention. But then comes the third pillar. And I think this is easily the most controversial part of the design.
Oh, random attention.
Random attention. It is so counterintuitive. Every query attends to a few completely random keys.
It really throws people off at first.
I mean, why introduce noise? If I'm trying to understand a complex sentence on page 5, why would looking at a totally random word from page 2 help me at all?
It goes back to graph theory again, specifically the small world network property. Have you ever played 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon?
Oh, sure. The idea that any actor is connected to Kevin Bacon by a really short chain of co-stars?
Right. That is a classic small world graph. In a sparse graph where you only talk to your immediate neighbors, it takes a really long time for information to travel from one end of the network to the other.
You have to hop from neighbor to neighbor to neighbor.
Exactly. And computationally, that takes many, many layers of processing. But if you add just a few random long-distance connections into the mix, the average path length between any two nodes in the whole graph just collapses.
It becomes incredibly short.
Very short.
So the random tokens are acting like wormholes. They allow information to just teleport across the sequence.
Precisely. It ensures that mathematically, no two pieces of information are ever too far apart to be connected.
Okay, that makes sense in theory. But here is where I want to push back a bit on the actual implementation.
Go for it.
Because on paper, random attention sounds brilliant. But physically, on a silicon chip, we know that modern GPUs and TPUs absolutely hate randomness.
Oh, they despise it.
They are built for dense, predictable matrix multiplication. If you tell a TPU, hey, go fetch this data point, then skip 500 spots and fetch that one, you are going to absolutely destroy your throughput with memory access latency.
You are absolutely right. In fact, if you just implemented naive random attention the way it sounds, it would probably run slower than the full attention model you were trying to replace in the first place.
The hardware just isn't built for scattershot memory access. So
Yeah.
how did Google actually get around this?
They blockified the attention. And this is really the engineering breakthrough that makes the elegant theory actually viable in the real world. They don't pick random individual tokens.
Yep.
They pick random blocks of tokens.
Let's unpack that a bit. What does blockifying mean in practice?
So instead of a query looking at, say, key number 45 and then key number 802, the model groups the entire sequence into contiguous blocks.
I see.
So query block 1 might attend to key block 5. Because they are grabbing these contiguous chunks of memory all at once, the GPU can use its vectorization and coalesced memory access the way it was designed to.
So it's block sparse attention. They took this random scattershot approach and wrangled it into a structured block-based format that the TPU can actually digest efficiently.
Exactly. It allows them to keep all those theoretical benefits of the small world graph, those wormholes, while keeping the actual operations linear and fast on the hardware.
Okay, so they built this three-headed monster: window, global, and random attention. And we know it runs fast. But the big question remains, is it actually smart?
Right.
Did blockifying everything and pruning the graph make the model unable to actually reason?
The authors were very aware of that concern. They didn't just want to show empirical benchmark results, they wanted mathematical proof. So a huge chunk of the paper is dedicated to theoretical guarantees.
Yeah, they bring up universal approximation.
Which is the baseline you want to see. It mathematically proves that, assuming you have enough parameters, this sparse architecture can approximate any continuous sequence-to-sequence function that a dense transformer can.
Meaning we haven't fundamentally lost the ability to represent complex relationships just by dropping connections.
Exactly. But then they go a step further, and this is crucial. They discuss Turing completeness.
And I want to be really clear for the listeners here. When computer scientists say Turing complete, they don't just mean it's a computer. What does Turing completeness actually imply for a language model in this context?
It is about the ability to maintain a robust chain of logic. A Turing complete system can theoretically simulate any algorithm.
Okay.
For a language model, this means it can handle conditional logic, it can handle loops, and memory retrieval, all without the signal decaying over long distances.
So if I ask the model to read a 50-page contract, find every single instance of clause A, compare it to clause B, and if condition X is true, output Y. That requires a really stable computational state.
Precisely, and they prove that BIGBIRD, despite being heavily sparse, preserves this Turing completeness. It validates that the shortcuts provided by the global and random attention pillars are completely sufficient to maintain the full logical integrity of the sequence.
However, there is no free lunch in computer science.
Never.
The paper explicitly identifies one area where BIGBIRD fails. They call it task 1.
Yes. And this is a very specific theoretical vector problem. Imagine you have a large collection of unit vectors, and your task is to find the one vector that is furthest away from another specific target vector.
Okay, so in a standard full attention model, that is incredibly easy because every vector is already looking at every other vector. You can just do a brute force comparison instantly.
It evaluates everything at once. But in BIGBIRD, because of the sparsity, you don't have those direct lines of sight between every point.
Right.
To find that furthest vector, you have to route the information through the global tokens, or you have to hop through the random connections. It ends up requiring many, many more processing layers to solve the same problem.
Which ties into the orthogonal vector conjecture they mentioned. Basically, for tasks that strictly require comparing everything to everything else simultaneously, sparsity is a massive weakness.
It is. But the counter-argument, and it's a strong one, is that natural language, and as we'll see, biology, simply aren't structured like that.
They are random vectors.
Right. They have syntax, they have hierarchy and grammar. You rarely, if ever, need to compare every single word to every other word just to understand a paragraph.
Well, let's see if that hypothesis holds up in the real world. They ran BIGBIRD on standard NLP tasks to prove it. They pre-trained it using masked language modeling on all the usual massive data sets, books, Wikipedia, CC News.
And they saw immediate, massive gains in question answering, specifically on multi-document datasets like HotPotQA.
HotPotQA is such a great benchmark for this because it forces multi-hop reasoning. The answer isn't just sitting in one sentence. You have to find a fact in paragraph A,
Right.
which gives you a clue that leads you to paragraph F, which finally gives you the answer.
And this is exactly where the 4096 token window shines. Standard models, because they are limited to 512 tokens, they literally have to chop the document into tiny pieces.
And when you chop it up, you might sever the connection between paragraph A and paragraph F.
You lose the bridge. The model literally can't make the hop. But BIGBIRD holds the entire context in its memory at once. It can traverse those hops without losing the thread.
And the results were clear. It achieved state-of-the-art results. It beat out highly optimized models like Roberta and even the long-former model.
It also did incredibly well on abstractive summarization, particularly with the ARXIV dataset, which is scientific papers, and the big patents dataset.
Which makes perfect sense. If you are trying to write a summary of a patent, the crucial information is distributed everywhere.
Exactly.
You have the abstract up top, the specific claims buried in the middle, the technical description at the end. A model that only reads the first 512 tokens is basically reading the intro and just hallucinating the rest.
Yeah, just guessing. BIGBIRD outperformed the baseline models by a significant margin there. They saw about a 5% jump in Rouge scores for the ARXIV dataset.
Just because it could finally synthesize the whole document structure. So for text, the sparse attention hypothesis definitely holds. It works. But I have to say, the part of this paper that really grabbed me, the part that elevates it beyond just being another incremental NLP paper, is the massive pivot they make in the second half.
Oh, to genomics.
The genomics twist. They took this architecture, which was designed to read English sentences, and they applied it to the fundamental code of human life.
It is a fascinating crossover, and it makes sense when you think about it. I mean, we treat DNA as a sequence, A, C, G, T.
Sure, but it's not exactly a sentence. You can't just feed it in, like, English words.
No, but it shares key properties with language. It has syntax, it has grammar-like structures. To make it work, the researchers used byte pair encoding to tokenize the DNA.
Okay, so instead of words, they are grouping the DNA base pairs into tokens.
Right. It averaged out to about 8.78 base pairs per token.
And then they just ran masked language modeling on it. They literally just hid chunks of the human genetic code and asked BIGBIRD to guess what was missing.
That is exactly what they did. They pre-trained it on the human reference genome. And just by learning to predict those missing sequences over and over, the model effectively taught itself the underlying rules of genetics.
That is wild. Let's look at the downstream tasks they tested it on, because this is where the long sequence capability becomes a literal biological superpower. They tested it on promoter region prediction.
Right, so a promoter is a very specific region of DNA that acts kind of like an on switch for a gene. It initiates the transcription process.
Okay.
Identifying where these regions are is absolutely critical for understanding how genes are expressed. And BIGBIRD achieved 99.9% accuracy on this task.
99.9%. That is
Right.
effectively a solved problem at that point.
It really is. It outperformed dpromoter, which was a specialized, purpose-built tool designed exclusively for that exact task. BIGBIRD beat it by 5%.
Just by treating it like a long language problem.
Exactly. But the second task is the one that I think truly highlights why the BIGBIRD architecture is so special. Chromatin profile prediction.
Right. This involves predicting the functional effects of non-coding DNA. But to really grasp why this is hard, we have to remember that DNA isn't just a long, flat string floating in two-dimensional space.
No, it is a complex three-dimensional structure. It is tightly coiled, folded, and packed into the nucleus of the cell.
So that means a segment of DNA at, say, position 1 in the sequence might actually be physically touching a segment at position 10,000.
Because of the way the strand folds back on itself.
Exactly. So even though they are incredibly far apart in the written text of the genome sequence, they are next-door neighbors in physical space.
And that physical contact allows them to interact chemically. This is the ultimate long-range dependency. A standard model that reads the DNA linearly, chunk by chunk, would think those two segments are completely unrelated.
It would never see the connection. But BIGBIRD, with its global tokens and those random shortcuts, it can bridge that 10,000 position gap instantly.
It matches the actual biology perfectly. In fact, if you think back to the random attention pillar we discussed,
The wormholes.
the wormholes, right. In the context of DNA, those random connections might actually be simulating the physical foldings of the chromatin structure itself.
Oh, wow. That is a massive insight. The small world network of the mathematical graph is effectively modeling the physical small world of the folded DNA in the cell.
It really suggests that the architecture of BIGBIRD might actually be a better fit for genomics than it is for English text. And the results back that up. It showed significant improvements in predicting those non-coding interactions compared to the previous convolutional models.
It's incredible. So let's zoom out here and look at what this paper actually achieved. We have a model that finally breaks the 512 token barrier.
Yes.
It uses this clever mix of window, global, and random attention to approximate a full transformer, but at a fraction of the computational cost.
And it does so with linear complexity. That is the key. It opens the door to routinely processing 4096 tokens and arguably much more as the hardware continues to improve.
It moves us from paragraph-level AI to true document-level AI.
And even genome-level AI. It changes the fundamental question from what can I squeeze into the context window to how do I properly structure the attention mechanism.
Right. It proves that you don't actually need to pay attention to absolutely everything to understand the whole picture. You just need to pay attention to the right things.
Your neighbors, the global context, and a few random connections to keep everything grounded.
So I want to leave the listener with a thought on that specific idea. Sparse versus dense. Because we've established today that BIGBIRD works.
Mm-hmm.
It successfully approximates the high-level intelligence of a dense, fully connected graph, but it uses a sparse, highly efficient one to do it.
It absolutely does.
So if you are listening, think about this. If a sparse graph with just a few random connections can yield that kind of high-level intelligence in silicon, what does that suggest about our own biological neural networks?
Oh, that's an interesting direction.
I mean, we know the human brain is incredibly efficient energetically.
It runs on, what, about 20 watts of power?
Exactly, 20 watts. A fraction of an NVIDIA GPU. So are our brains really fully connected dense graphs? Or is the efficiency of human consciousness actually built on a BIGBIRD-style architecture?
Mostly local connections with just enough random long-distance wiring to connect the dots.
Exactly. It's a really compelling hypothesis. Maybe we're all just sparse attention mechanisms relying on those random shortcuts to make sense of the world.
Maybe our random thoughts aren't bugs in the system. Maybe they are the feature that makes it all work.
Something for you to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into BIGBIRD. We will see you on the next one.